what Star Wars has always gotten wrong about villains. In the third episode of this series, the most dangerous man in the Star Wars galaxy serves tea. He rinses the cups. He performs the ceremony with the same precision he applies to combat. Total attention, total control. It is a moment that would seem absurd in any previous version of this character. In this series, it is the key to understanding everything that the show is actually about. Maul Shadow Lord works because it understands that Maul's defining characteristic was never his power. Instead, it was what power did to him. He arrived on scene in 1999 as a weapon in someone else's war. He was built, deployed, discarded, rebuilt, and discarded again. Shadow Lord is the first story to ask what he becomes when the war ends, the master disappears, and he is left, on his own terms, to figure out what he is and what he wants to build. The show places Maul in a neo-noir world, visually indebted to Blade Runner, morally complex in the way that best crime fiction is, and tasks him with reconstructing the criminal syndicate Crimson Dawn. Alongside him, it introduces Devon, a young Twi'lek Jedi Padawan surviving under the Empire with her aging master. Their dynamic is the engine of the series. It is also the mechanism through which Shadow Lord makes its central argument about villains, about ideology, and about what it costs a person to choose certainty in an uncertain world. If this kind of analysis is worth your time, like is the most direct signal you can send. It tells the algorithm this conversation deserves a wider audience, and it takes you 1 second. To understand what Shadow Lord accomplishes, we need to be honest about what the franchise has historically done with this character. Maul's introduction in The Phantom Menace is one of cinema's greatest entrances. The design is immediate and arresting. The face paint, the horns, the doubled lightsaber. He communicates threat through pure visual language, and his duel with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon remains one of the best choreographed fight scenes in the entire saga. But Maul speaks approximately 3 lines in the film, and his death, bisected by Obi-Wan, is staged as a resolution, as if the spectacle itself were the point. In many ways, it was. The prequel trilogy's relationship with its antagonist was primarily aesthetic. Maul was a design. His function was to be the most dangerous-looking instrument Darth Sidious could deploy, and when that deployment was complete, he was discarded. What the film never examined was what that usage meant for him as a person. And it never needed to, because the film didn't conceive of him as a person. That wasn't his role. His return in the Clone Wars is where the character acquired genuine depth. Filoni and his team understood that a man kept alive, literally, by pure hatred for years is not simply a revenge story. More so, he's a case study on what happens when someone's entire selfhood is organized around obsession. Maul's arc through Clone Wars and Rebels, the grief over his brother, the obsession with Obi-Wan, the desperate attempt to build something real with Mandalorians, is some of the franchise's most serious character work. It takes the interiority of a Sith seriously in a way the films rarely manage. But even in those series, Maul remains defined relationally. His story is always his story in opposition to someone else. His story is always his story in opposition to something or someone. We have Obi-Wan, Sidious, the Jedi Order whose values he was trained to destroy. He is most himself, most legible as a character when he's reacting to or against an external reference point. Solo, a Star Wars story, gave him a cameo engineered for audience recognition. The reveal that he led Crimson Dawn was constructed to produce a moment of surprise, not to develop anything. He appeared, communicated threat, and then he was gone. The story was not about him. Shadow Lord is the first project to place Maul in a context where none of these reference points are present. His master is gone. Obi-Wan exists somewhere in the galaxy, but pursuing him is not the purpose of this story. Maul is starting to define his own purpose now, and the planet he has chosen, the syndicate he is rebuilding, and the person he's watching. What Maul builds on this world is a version of the galaxy ordered according to his philosophy. He is taken from Dathomir as a child, shaped into an instrument of Sith doctrine, and again, discarded. Shadow Lord's central question, one it never states aloud because the best stories don't always state their questions aloud, is this: what does someone build when everything they were given was a lie, and they still have the power to build something? Devon is not the lead character of Maul Shadow Lord, and she doesn't have to be. She is more structurally important than that. She is the moral pressure test the series applies to everything Maul believes. She is a young Twi'lek Jedi Padawan, surviving alongside her aging master. Her situation is established quickly and with care. She is one of the last Jedi alive in a galaxy that has made the Jedi illegal. hunted by an Inquisitorius built for exactly that purpose. She and her master are not rebels in the Andor sense. They're not organizing resistance or nurturing the seeds of a future movement. They are hiding, trying to remain who they are in a world that has decided that who they are is a crime. And this is the context into which Maul arrives. And the series immediately demonstrates something precise about what sustained contact with a figure like Maul does to someone in Devon's position. The conventional Star Wars corruption narrative works in a recognizable pattern. A character is tempted by anger or grief or perhaps the promise of power. They are pulled toward the dark side by something the audience can name. The mechanics of their fall are visible because the temptation itself is visible. Devon is not drawn to any of those things. She is not particularly angry, nor is she seduced by power. What this series gives to her instead is something far subtler and far more honest about how moral compromise actually operates. She is drawn to Maul's competence, his clarity, his complete absence of ambivalence about who he is and what he's willing to do. Devon and her master have a pivotal conversation in the series' middle episodes about whether to pursue Maul or to leave the planet entirely. Its depth is the depth of a genuine ethical dilemma. Her master cannot help but be the hero his training demands. His Jedi code is more a reflex than it is an ideology. When given a choice between safety and obligation, his instinct is obligation. He cannot stop saving bystanders, even when doing so costs him strength he cannot afford to spend. Devon watches this. She watches her master burn through himself in service of a code that the galaxy no longer validates, following its demands in a world that will punish him for it. She watches a man shaped by an order that no longer exists, trying to remain what that order made him, in conditions that order never anticipated. And in parallel to that, she watches Maul, who has no code except the one he built himself, from scratch, out of the wreckage of everything he was given, operate with a certainty that her master can no longer sustain. Maul's approach to Devon, as the series constructs it, is more patient and deliberate than any other form of Sith instruction he received. He doesn't tell her what to think. He doesn't offer her power or a cause or vengeance. Instead, he demonstrates his mastery. He shows her what it looks like to live with absolute clarity, absolute certainty about who you are and what you are doing. In a galaxy that offers almost no one that clarity, it seems very tempting. And then he waits. In a sense, this is the most effective and most dangerous form of ideological seduction. The presentation of a framework that seems to work, delivered by someone who's clearly paid a high price for it and survived. Devon is not being asked to choose the dark side. What she's presented with here is the opportunity to observe someone who has a clear worldview, and to draw her own conclusions. The series tracks this accumulation in careful detail. Devon's wrist injury, mentioned quietly in later episodes, doesn't heal. This is a small detail, but it stands out precisely because it's not underlined. It's the series' most perfect image for what the proximity to Maul produces, marks that don't fully register until they have already changed everything. I want to open this up to comments now. Is Devon's logic defensible? Given what her master's commitments cost him, given what Maul's certainty produces, where do you land? I'm curious, and I do read everything. There is a reason audiences keep reaching for the word Andor when they describe Maul Shadow Lord. It's partly aesthetic. The neo-noir visual language, moral complexity, the decision to embed a Star Wars story in a world full of crime and survival rather than in the mythology of a chosen hero, but the deeper reason is structural. I spent a lot of time with that question in my essay on Andor, specifically the moment the show became something different from what Star Wars had done before it. If that's a conversation you want to have, the video is linked on screen now. I've also put together a playlist of my film essays in the description. They're built to be watched in sequence, but any one of them stands alone. Like Andor, Shadow Lord understands that the Empire is most threatening when it is not the active antagonist of every scene. The criminal world Maul navigates in the early episodes, the Pikes, the local power structures, the planet's law enforcement, exists in the Empire's shadow, not in direct confrontation with it. Detective Grander Lawson, one of the series' quietest and most effective supporting characters, is a man who refuses to call on the Empire even when the logic of his situation seems to demand it. He is old enough to remember the Republic. He recognizes a lightsaber as something other than a weapon. His refusal to escalate, to invite the Empire into a situation he might otherwise resolve locally, is the series' most efficient statement about what this period in Star Wars history actually means at the ground level. There are still people who haven't fully surrendered to the new order, and their resistance is not particularly political or heroic. It's just instinct. The feeling that what has replaced the Empire is wrong, and that instinct is being closed down one decision at a time. For most of its 4 episodes, Shadow Lord operates with this structure. The Empire is background dread. Maul is the most dangerous figure in the immediate world. The criminal hierarchies have their own logic, and the moral complexity lives within those hierarchies. Then he arrives. The first brother of the Inquisitorius appears in episodes 5 and 6, and the tonal shift is immediate. Everything that seemed locally dangerous becomes small in the space of a few scenes. The Inquisitorius does not negotiate. It doesn't maneuver within existing power structures. It hunts, and has been sent specifically for Devon. This structural decision, withholding the Empire's active presence and then releasing it, reflects the same instinct that made Andor's pre-Gorman scene so effective. The horror of a totalitarian system is not most vivid when it is always visible. It's in moments like these where it's most vivid, when the character's sense of operating beneath its notice is revealed to have always been an illusion. Maul and Devon now share a common threat. The Inquisitorius is looking for her, and Maul, whatever his motives, is the most capable person on the planet at dealing with exactly this kind of problem. The series has constructed, with patience and structural intelligence, the conditions under which Devon's philosophical calculation becomes most urgent. The moment when survival and principle point in opposite directions, and she has to choose. Let's return to the scene we opened with. Maul serves tea in episode 3. He rinses the cups, he uses actual tea ceremony implements, and performs the ritual with full attention. The internet responded to the scene immediately, partly because of its incongruity. The Maul of the Phantom Menace communicates entirely through violence. He does not pour tea. Shadow Lord's Maul does, and understanding what that reveals about who he has become is the most interpretive key to the whole series. As we said before, Maul was trained to be a weapon. Sith doctrine gave him a framework built entirely around domination, power, and the willingness to do what others cannot. That doctrine did not include rituals of care, or gestures of precision that served no violent purpose, or practices that gave him something beyond tactical advantage. What the tea ceremony shows is that he has built those himself, across years of survival, of rebuilding his body from ruin, reconstructing a syndicate, developing a sense of purpose in the absence of anyone who could give him one. He cultivated practices that gave him something the Sith doctrine never offered: control over himself, expressed through form rather than through force. This is a profound and quietly devastating detail. The discipline that Sidious gave Maul was always externally directed. It was designed to make him effective against enemies. Seeing what Maul has developed on his own as an inward discipline, a way of being present, precise, and grounded in himself, that's a big change, and it has nothing to do with anyone else. The tea ceremony is a form of mastery that emerged from someone who survived their complete destruction and had to build a self from what remained. And this is what Devon is in the presence of. She is not watching a villain perform a charming parlor trick. She is watching someone who has been broken at the level of identity, taken apart at the root, and who has rebuilt himself into something coherent, certain, and capable. For her, that coherence is the most compelling thing she's encountered in the years since Order 66 dismantled the world her training assumed would always be there. His approach doesn't advertise itself as the dark side. It seems to be presenting a philosophy that works in the world as it is. And I think crucially, the series never tells Devon that she's wrong to want that. It simply tracks, in careful detail, what wanting it leaves on her. The franchise's most persistent limitation with its antagonist has been the assumption that moral complexity can be communicated through aesthetic sophistication. Villains look threatening, they deliver memorable lines, and occasionally reveal a layer of history that explains their choices. Vader's backstory, Palpatine's patience, Thrawn's tactical intelligence, these are characters we understand through opposition, through the clarity of what they oppose more than what they embody. That explanation is not interiority though. Knowing why someone became a villain is not the same as understanding a worldview that can be examined from the inside. Shadow Lord joins Andor on a very short list of Star Wars stories willing to build that interior. It gives Maul a genuine philosophy rather than a motivation. It then places a person next to him capable of engaging with that philosophy at depth, and the series is structured so that we watch the engagement unfold across episodes without a clean resolution, without a dramatic moment of temptation that we are meant to recognize and judge. Devon's calculation is the audience's calculation. We are watching the same evidence she is. We see what her master's absolute commitment costs him. We see what Maul's certainty produces. We understand why the framework is compelling. And the series trusts us to sit with that understanding without resolving it into a comfortable moral verdict. This is what makes Maul genuinely threatening in Shadow Lord in a way that the acrobatics and the lightsaber never quite managed. Because again, the audience is doing the same calculation Devon is. And we can see the appeal. The most dangerous ideas are the ones that look like clarity. Maul has always been one of the most tragic figures in Star Wars. A child taken from Dathomir, shaped into an instrument of a philosophy he didn't choose, deployed and discarded by a master who saw him as a tool, kept alive in the most literal sense by the only thing left to him: hatred. For years, the franchise acknowledged this tragedy in flashes, in moments scattered across Clone Wars and Rebels, and a brief cameo, but no story built something adequate to it. Maul, Shadow Lord, is that story. It doesn't give him a redemption arc, because redemption is the wrong frame for what this character's tragedy actually requires. What it gives him is something more honest. A portrait of a person who survived his own destruction, rebuilt himself according to the only logic available to him, and is now, in the presence of Devon Izara, being confronted with what that logic costs the people around him. Devon, in some senses, is not really a character in a Star Wars show. She is the moral question the entire series is built to ask. When the world is broken, and someone offers you a framework that seems to work, at what point does accepting it make you responsible for what it produces? Shadow Lord is the first Star Wars project to give Maul room proportionate to the tragedy he's always contained, and in doing so, it reveals what the franchise has always gotten wrong about its most dangerous figures. The assumption that understanding them makes them smaller. Understanding Maul makes him the most compelling figure in the room. If you're drawn to stories that challenge and inspire, stories about characters who operate in the space between who they are and who the world made them, subscribe and hit the bell. My next essay is on David Fincher's The Killer, and it asks a question I think connects directly to what we've explored here today. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and stay copacetic.